themselves. I am your host, Piper Gibson, Director of Course Enrollment for Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. If you are just joining us, make sure to drop the word test into the chat, and we are going to send you FDN's 3-step guide. This week, I am super excited to have Boomer Anderson with me. He is joining us from all the way around the world in Amsterdam. We are going to get some amazing information from him today. So make sure to drop the word test into the chat. How are you, Boomer? How is it going?
I am amazing, Piper, and it's even better now that I get to talk to you. This is right before my normal bedtime, so I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. Boomer is going to be teaching us about the value of measuring. So Boomer, tell us a little bit what prompted you to become an FDN.
Very good question. So when you kind of look at a 30,000-foot view, when I decided to pivot my life, my career from finance into health, I still held on to this belief that data itself can help guide us and provide solutions that intuitive feeling sometimes can be misleading. This both comes from personal experience, but also things I see with others. And so when I looked at the landscape of how to approach the world of health and how to really just understand the world in a different way, and something that aligned with me and my values towards data, when you start looking and listing certifications, FDN comes up there. And so I had a number of different conversations with people who have gone through the program. And of course, I've heard about it before. But that reliance on lab testing was really what got me. And I really enjoy the idea of being able to see the results from a data-driven approach and then apply that.
Absolutely agree. That is awesome. When did you graduate from the course and how long did it take you?
So this is kind of a funny story, Piper. So I graduated from the course probably, I want to say a year ago. Okay. And I did take a little bit longer than the given period, full confession there. And the reason is that, I kept putting some things off because I was trying to do like typical entrepreneurs, right? Like you try to do too many things at once. And then, it comes to that point where you're like, wow, the deadline's right there. And I raced to get it all done. Luckily got it done with the help of a very, very good mentor throughout the process. And have been applying principles from FDN towards my own unique practice ever since.
How are you building your practice? What is your plan?
Sure. So my practice is unique in the sense that when I describe it to people, what I do is I work with a finite number of individuals. And my goal here is to work with entrepreneurs and high-performing professionals to help them change the world by optimizing their health. And so using that, I have a finite target that I work with. And given some of my background, some of those actually former colleagues, clients became clients in this sense as well. And so they trusted me, they knew me from my previous life, and they then became clients. And the good thing about these types of people is they refer people. So largely my practice thus far has grown through referrals and mainly just getting out there and public speaking, which is something that I do quite often. I also have a podcast that comes out once a week that is top 100 in iTunes in careers in a few different countries.
Wow, I love that. That is really awesome. So how has lab testing and the whole FDN approach really helped you to solve your own cases or even your clients' cases?
Sure. Let's start with my own, because I think what's interesting here is I was my original first client, and a lot of what I got into was around adrenal stress and a sort of adrenal dysfunction, if you will. And that comes from years and years of just pushing it too hard, too fast, too soon, right? And as a result, we've all seen that cortisol chart, right? The 24-hour cortisol chart, and it should look like this beautiful logarithm, and oftentimes it's very far from that. And mine was and I wish my mentor were here because we kind of joke about this every once in a while. Mine was quite scary initially. And this was in the early days of me taking the course. I took the test because, of course, I wanted to know. But in having that information, I kind of knew where to focus, right? And so that adrenal dysfunction, and then just working through all of that work required some supplementation. It required, of course, rest and just a lot of the things that we talk about as dress principles. Now, I can then take this and then passport it and say, like, hey, I had my own successful case, but you asked a very good question on how I apply it with clients. Would it be okay for me to just kind of go a little bit into that as well?
Absolutely. I would love for you to expand on that.
Sure. So when we look at how life since FDN and what's that looked like, I've actually taken a role in a not-for-profit association in the United States called Home Hope, which actually helps doctors and health practitioners really educate on these concepts of health optimization. Again, this is a non-for-profit because what's interesting about our current system is it's very much focused on how we treat sickness, illness, and there is definitely a place for that. If you have something that requires an emergency room visit, there's definitely a place for that. But we don't really talk that much about health optimization. And this is one of those reasons why I also gravitated towards FDN in the first place. And so when we look at how I work with clients now, it's a rigorous amount of analysis initially up front. And so what we do is we look at anything from that adrenal stress profile, which we talked about earlier, that beautiful 24-hour cortisol chart, to hormones, to even micronutrient panels. So we've expanded sort of those initial tests that I ran. And of course, we look at the gut and we look to make sure that, you don't have the presence of leaky gut, or if you do, how do we deal with that? And then we expand further to see if there's parasites and presence of fungi overgrowth like candida, etc. And then once we have all that information, and that could be classified as sort of metabolomics classically, or additionally lab testing. And once we have all that information, along with some qualitative tests, I'm able to map pretty thoroughly what that person does and what really triggers that person. And so once I have that information, I take them through a behavior change process. And so anyone that works with me, there's a minimum requirement there of 3 months, because not only does it usually take 3 months for some of these nutrient therapies for us to kick in, but also when we're talking about really nailing down and making a dent in somebody's, call them bad habits, call them major opportunities for health improvement, that takes time. And so when we make somebody commit for 3 months, it's because I think that's the minimum amount of time that I need in order to make a dent in somebody's health opportunities, if you will. And so I meet with those people at least twice a month, and then I make myself available to them regularly. But again, this is also because I've deliberately structured my business so that I work with a finite number of people.
So where does the value of measuring come in? Can you explain that to us?
Oh, yes. So I'm a quantified self nerd at heart. And are you familiar with the quantified self?
A little bit.
Sure. Just to give a little bit of background on that before I go into the value of measurement, right? And so quantified self is essentially N of 1 experimentation. It's self-experimentation through measurement. And it was originally started by Gary Wolf and Kevin Kelly probably over 10 years ago. But there are these quantified self meetups. And when I was in finance, I participated in quantified self with the large goal of how to sleep less and work more. Now I've become more enlightened, if you will, or just smarter about things, and have taken the approach of, okay, how do I use this information, this self-experimentation, if you will, to improve my health, but also to improve the health of my clients? And so what do we do and what do we use measurement for? Well, initially there's measurement in the form up front, and I mentioned that rigorous analysis. And that allows us to see really what's under the hood, right? And so if you open up the car, or if you open up the car hood, and I know Reed's a big fan of classic cars, or at least classic motorcycles, right? If you open up that hood and you look underneath that hood, you want to make sure that all of the parts are really running according to plan. And so when we do that rigorous amount of analysis up front, it's what I like to call benchmarking. We need to understand where you are now. And then what we do is we take that the data or that measurement and we implement it over time. And I'll explain what that means as well. So you have benchmark up front, and then as we work together, we'll of course retest. And so we have continuing ongoing benchmarks, which allow the client really to see how they're doing, what things they need to focus on, and really kind of titrate upwards, if you will, in terms of health optimization. Now, we also use data in that process of behavior change. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier was quantified self. And there are various wearable devices out there, from rings on your finger to continuous glucose measurements and all of these kind of things. And what those data points and measurement points allow us to do is to create feedback loops. So let's take, for instance, Piper, I don't know if you drink wine, but occasionally I'll have a glass. It's been a long time, but occasionally I'll have a glass. And one of the feedback loops that I like to point out to clients initially is like, yeah, okay, go out, have your 2 glasses, 3 glasses of wine, but tell me what that does to your deep sleep and how you feel the next morning. And so when we look at the net effect of how they feel and deep sleep, it's a negative feedback loop. And so that actually helps me accelerate the rate of behavior change. And so when I work with a client, it's essentially objectives, strategies, tactics, and then there's a 4th line for measurement. And so when we set out our objectives for working together, I want to know what biomarker or what wearable technology I'm using to track that, so that we can really institute, okay, are these modifications, these lifestyle modifications that I'm making in this person's life effective? Are they following it? And are they getting to notice or associate with the data and how it feels to them? And so it, in a way, helps hockey stick the whole process.
Yes, and I love your example of the wine and the negative feedback loop, because I think so many people can relate to that, and it's easily understandable. So I love that. We talked a little bit about your niche or your ideal client. How many people do you work with on a regular basis?
Sure. So at any given time period, I limit myself to about, it ranges between 10 and 20 people because of my outside involvements. So there are certain clients that I will just see for measurement purposes only, and they will go off and then try to implement all of this themselves. But typically I work with about 15, let's split the difference there, 15 different clients. And it's a very, very intense process in the sense that I'm available to these people almost all the time. They have my personal phone number whenever they have a question about something, and it's a very, very intense and rigorous process. Therefore, I limit my client base quite significantly.
Wow, that's awesome. So let me know, I would love to know a little bit more about how you work. Are you part-time or are you full-time? Do you see people in person? Are you virtual? A little of both?
So I am 100% virtual, with the exception of if I happen to be visiting in their city or public speaking in their city, I will obviously make time to go see these clients. There are rare occasions whereby the client requests me to be at some sort of conference that they're participating in, or some sort of event that they're participating in which case I will fly and join them. So that answers the question on whether or not I'm virtual. Now, Piper, forgive me, repeat the rest of your question again.
I was just wondering if you were part-time, full-time, just a little bit more about how you work with your clients.
Sure. So the pie is, it shifts, right? And so that pie shifts based on some of the things that I'm involved in. And so right now, I guess you would consider me part-time, but If you looked at hours put in per week, it could arguably be a full-time job. But I have outside involvements through a supplement company, but also through that not-for-profit foundation that I mentioned earlier. And so those areas, that mission, I'm very focused on as well. And so in a way, I do have my client business is part-time, and it is very intense. So from an hours perspective, one can look at it as full-time. And so I dedicate a certain number of days per week to working with these clients virtually, but also make myself available to them should they have any questions in the meantime. So I mean, breaking out my day or breaking out the pies of my day, you can say that it's probably 60-40 in favor of outside involvements versus client involvements. But I've deliberately structured my life that way because if you look at the underlying theme of everything that I do, it's elevating the human experience through health. And so whether it be the podcast, which is getting information to people, whether it be the foundation, which is really trying to change the tide that is health and getting people to focus more on health optimization, or whether it be the supplement company, which is actually really focused on delivering the bridge for a solution, a nutrient solution that takes place immediately, so that nutrient therapies, which usually take longer, we have a bridge to give the client an immediate solution. So all of those have one common theme. So my whole life is dedicated to health optimization, but I do have, a certain amount of time for very specific clients.
So you mentioned that you do work with a very specific set of clients. And if those clients are listening, or any of our interview listeners are out there, they would love to know how they can find you. Where can they get in touch with you? Your podcast, your website, your social media. Would you like to share that with us, please?
Of course. So you can find everything that I do at decodingsuperhuman.com. Full confession, the website will be overhauled in a little under 2 weeks' time, and we will have a whole bunch of updated information there. You can also plug in Decoding Superhuman on almost every social media network. I'm most active on LinkedIn, second most active on Instagram, but you can find me there. And if you want to get directly in touch, there are buttons on the website. You can also reach me. I'm happy to give my email address to people. It's just boomer@decodingsuperhuman.com. If you have questions, or if you were interested in something like this, I'm happy to go through it with you in detail, exactly the processes that we go through and how it would work.
Thank you. I'm sure you're going to have some people reaching out to you. Do you have a number one tool, a resource, or piece of info that you've learned from FDN that has really made all the difference in your personal health or as a health professional, and in getting those real results?
There's quite a few, right? And I'm debating on which direction to go. But if you look at my client base, so here we go. If we're looking at myself, but also my client base and that whole story, the adrenals and stress and managing stress and building stress resilience, because stress for a lot of these people won't go away, but how to build stress resilience, that aspect of stress is key. And it's key in everyone that I work with. It's still key in myself, and something that I continually, I double down on that. Not all of what I focus on for my own health, but a portion of what I focus on for my own health is continually building stress resilience, and that, vital reserve, I believe, was one of the terms from FDN.
I love it. Is there a piece of advice you'd like to share with health coaches or professionals that might be watching right now?
A general piece of advice for any entrepreneur, any health coach, health professional: find a way to enjoy the journey. There are times where everything will get frustrating, And you may go and think you did a great job, and this has happened to me, so I'm just telling from personal experience. Think you did a great job doing a great speech, and then all of a sudden, you don't get any clients from it, and it may kind of put you down. But remember, it's all love and learning, and take that moment to reflect on what you learned, because everything is temporary, and you will eventually get over it, but enjoy the journey.
That is fantastic advice. Fantastic. What about people out there who are struggling to get results with their own health? Is there really a piece of advice that you have to share with them?
There's a few, right? And so there are ways you can look at the analysis end of this, because a lot of people, so let's back up to 30,000 feet. Right now, we sit in a society where we're constantly inundated with information. Depending on what news site you're reading, it's either vegetarian diet, carnivore diet, ketogenic diet. All of these things we're being told are the best thing for all 7 billion people on Earth. But in reality, you and I, Piper, are very different. We may have different needs, we may have different requirements, and whether that be discovering what those requirements are through something like that metabolic typing test, or getting a little bit deeper into metabolomics, that value of measurement and really digging underneath that hood cannot be understated, in the sense that, yes, it may cost a little bit of money up front, but you can always produce more money. You can't always produce more time. And so the time saved later on by knowing exactly what you need and how to pursue going to do that is extremely valuable. So I guess if you're sitting there, you're struggling, you don't know where to begin, go find somebody that knows what they're doing when it comes to measurement, and get yourself measured, get yourself tested. You can use blood, urine, stool. There's a whole bunch of tests out there. And just foundationally start to understand a little bit more about yourself, your biochemistry. And once you start digging underneath that hood, a lot of these problems, or opportunities, as I like to reframe them as, become pretty evident. I mean, sometimes there is a low-hanging fruit. Like if you have that person that walks in and sleeps 3 hours a night, that's a low-hanging fruit, and you know how to take action. But a lot of times there are people out there that are saying like, hey, is this it? Like, I still feel like junk, but I'm eating everything that all of these, various figureheads say. And so that's where measurement comes into play.
Beautifully said. Boomer, thank you so much for being on the Real Results Show today and sharing your insights with others about how to get real, long-term, sustainable health results, not just for yourself, but also for your clients. Mm-hmm. One more time, tell us a little bit about how people that are interested in working with you might find you.
Sure. So there's a couple of ways to find me. decodingsuperhuman.com is the website. You can find me on LinkedIn or Instagram. You can also head over, if you are interested in that, the not-for-profit work, you can go to homehope.org. But also, get in touch. And so please reach out. You can find me on Facebook. There's not too many Boomer Andersons out there, despite that oh so popular OK Boomer hashtag. But people can reach out to me on Facebook. And if you have questions, as most people know who listen to the podcast, which you can also listen to that as well, I respond to all of them to the extent that I can. If it's something medical, I probably can't respond to it. But other than that, let's chat.
Fantastic. Thank you so much again for coming on the show today. If you guys are watching the replay, make sure to drop the word test into the chat, and we are going to send you FDN's 3-step guide to getting real results. Thank you again, Boomer, for joining me. We will be back here next week, and I am going to have special guest Reed Davis with me. So make sure to check us out next week, same time, same place.
Reed's excellent. And thank you so much for your time, Piper. This is incredible.
Yes, thank you so much for joining me today. Bye, everybody.